back to everybody for our final panel of our first day of our California Ideas in Action Conference. As a reminder, make sure you log in again tomorrow at 11 a.m. Pacific time to watch 3 more great panel discussions. And also, again, a reminder for those of you who are watching on Zoom, if you have a question for any of our panelists, submit at any time using the Zoom Q&A function, which is about here on your Zoom screen at the bottom of your screen. I'll do my best to ask as many questions as time permits. So next, we're going to be turning to education and charter schools. You know, despite the success of charter schools, they've come under attack on multiple fronts in California in recent years. And state lawmakers actually enacted laws in 2019 and 2020 that make it harder to establish and operate charter schools in California. More recently, charter school opponents have used the COVID-19 crisis to exacerbate funding disparities between charter schools and traditional public schools. Now, as he does all of these education topics, PRI's Lance Izumi follows these issues affecting charter schools very closely, and he just published a new brief that he's going to talk about called New and Emerging Threats Facing Charter Schools. And Lance will share some of the findings in his new brief, and then he's going to lead a discussion with policymakers and charter school leaders, and they're going to share their firsthand accounts of what parents, students, and advocates must do to combat this growing threat from teachers' unions, state lawmakers, and even the new Biden administration, which takes office pretty openly hostile to their very existence. Now, for those of you who don't know Lance, Lance is the director of PRI's, senior director of PRI's Center for Education, and he's the author of several books for PRI, including Choosing Diversity, How Charter Schools Promote Diverse Learning Models and Meet the Diverse Needs of Parents and Children. And more recently, he authored, in December, we put out A Kite in a Hurricane No More, which documents the story of one brave young woman who overcame her learning disabilities thanks to science and school choice. Now, Lance has the street cred on this as well. He's a former member. Oh, and Norman, very good, is holding up that book. Oh, look at that. Very good product placement there. You know, more recently, so Lance is, as I mentioned, is a former member and 2-term president of the California Community Colleges Board of Governors. He's also a past chair and current board member of the Foundation for California Community Colleges, which is the official nonprofit that supports the community college system. And as listeners to our weekly Next Round podcast know, he was also the chief speechwriter for California Governor George Deukmejian, and he was also speechwriter for Attorney General Ed Meese in the Reagan administration. So without further ado, over to you, Lance.
Well, thanks very much, Tim, for that very kind introduction. And Norman and Cameron, thanks for the product placement. I really appreciate that. You know, I want to welcome all our viewers to PRI's Policy Conference and for today's panel on the challenges that charter schools are encountering. We have a terrific group of panelists with us today for our discussion. But before I introduce each of them for their remarks, let me set the stage by discussing the key findings from my recent PRI report that Tim referenced, which is called A New and Emerging Obstacles Facing Charter Schools. For many years, California has been a leader when it comes to the establishment and promotion and success of charter schools. Now, charter schools are publicly funded schools that are independent of school districts and which have greater flexibility to innovate. California adopted one of the country's first charter school laws back in 1992. And today there are around 1,300 charter schools in California with 675,000 students, which is more than 10% of total enrollment in our state. Recent research has shown that charter schools are succeeding in raising the achievement of students, especially from those students coming from low income and minority backgrounds. A recent Harvard study actually tracked a large group of students from charter schools and regular public schools over a 12-year period. And what the study found was that there was a larger increase in student achievement for students at charter schools than for students at district schools. And this increase translated to half a year's worth of learning, which is very considerable. And that increase was particularly pronounced among certain groups. For example, among African-American 8th grade charter school students, average math scores improved by an amount that was 4 times larger than students attending regular district schools. And the authors of the Harvard study concluded that why was this the case? Because better teaching and learning environments in charter schools were the cause for this higher performance amongst charter school students. And yet, despite this success, charter schools are facing more challenges than ever before. In my report that Tim referenced and which I held up, I identified 3 key new obstacles facing charter schools. First, lawmakers around the country are enacting laws that make it difficult to establish or to operate charter schools. And we certainly see that here in California. In 2019, for example, the legislature and Governor Gavin Newsom enacted a law that allowed school boards to deny the establishment or continued operation of charter schools for a variety of vague, subjective, and open-ended reasons, such as charter schools not serving community interests, whatever that means, or duplicating existing programs, regardless of whether regular public schools are implementing those programs very well. Second, lawmakers have used the budget process to starve charter schools of the funding that is rightfully theirs. Last year, the legislature and the governor pushed through a school funding formula that fails to fully fund growing charter schools and totally fails to fund any student enrollment growth at non-classroom based charter schools. This failure to allow funding to follow the child to the school that the child will attend goes against state laws and the state constitution. Further, research has shown that there are huge gaps between funding for regular public schools and charter schools. For instance, in Los Angeles, regular public schools receive $21,000 per pupil in revenue funding, while LA charter schools receive only a bit more than $13,000 per student. So third and finally, the teacher unions have made charter schools one of their top targets. The 2019 teacher strikes here in California were called in part to strong-arm local school boards to call a halt to the expansion and the establishment of new charter schools. In the November election, the teacher union succeeded in electing anti-charter school majorities on school boards in places like Oakland. The bottom line is that charter schools are under attack on multiple fronts. To discuss all of these developments, we have with us today a really distinguished panel of policymakers and practitioners. We're honored to have with us Assemblyman Kevin Kiley, who represents the 6th Assembly District, which includes parts of Sacramento County, Placer County, and El Dorado County. Assemblyman Kiley is the Vice Chair of the Assembly Education Committee, a former teacher, and a former State Deputy Attorney General. He's been a strong advocate of parental choice in education, and he's also a great friend. We also have with us Norman Gonzalez, who is the Director of Outreach and the Director of Compliance at John Adams Charter School, which has campuses in Roseville, El Dorado Hills, and Lincoln. Norman previously served as School Development Manager for the California Charter School Association. I profiled John Adams Academy in my 2019 PRI book, Choosing Diversity, and I've had the great pleasure of working with Norman. Thanks, Norman. Last but certainly not least, we have with us Cameron Curry, who is the co-founder and CEO of the Classical Academies charter schools, which are located in San Diego County. He previously worked for the Greater San Diego Chamber of Commerce and is married to a school teacher. I also profiled the Classical Academies in my Choosing Diversity book. And when I interviewed Cameron, I was amazed not only by his knowledge about education and charter schools, but I was amazed by the collection of pop culture iconic material in his office, including the purple suit that was made famous in the movie Willy Wonka. So in addition to being a pop culture enthusiast, though, Cameron is an incredible, truly incredible leader. And with that, I want to start off our panel discussion by asking Assemblyman Kiley to give us his opening remarks and his thoughts.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Lance. And really delighted to be part of this panel with, panelists and, of course, a leader of the panel who I admire so much. Lance is really my go-to guy when it comes to all things education and has, educated me about a great many issues, usually over a very delicious English breakfast at Fox and Goose. So I don't know. Well, they got outdoor dining now, so we'll have to wear a very warm jacket and go back sometime soon. But in any case, I have been in the legislature for a few years now. I've been the vice chair of the Education Committee in the Assembly. So I've gotten a sort of up close look at the war on charter schools that has been waged there, and which has, taken on a sort of new level of aggression under Governor Gavin Newsom. You'll recall that he was elected with the overwhelming support of the anti-equity special interests, anti-choice special interests, namely the California Teachers Association, who spent millions electing him. Jerry Brown had sort of an ambiguous relationship with those groups, had at least had some support for the idea of charters. So there was a lot of the drive by those special interests and the legislators they control to, shut down charters or stop them from opening that couldn't happen under Jerry Brown. So once they got their guy in, once they got Gavin Newsom, it was like, all right, it's open season. And so in 2019, there were a whole package of bills that were aimed at, killing off charters. And you mentioned the most egregious of them, Lance, although there were actually bills that would have put an outright moratorium on new charters, or would have put a cap on the number of charters that you can have. Those ones didn't ultimately make it across the finish line, but they were part of this package of bills introduced by CTA legislators and who were going to waste no time in, cashing in on the support of the new governor. And so, what ultimately passed, of course, was terrible. It was denounced by civil rights groups such as chapters of the NAACP and the Urban League, who noted that charter schools have been the greatest force in this public education for trying to reduce achievement gaps and expand educational opportunity. And here the governor and the legislature were trying to rein them in or to restrict their growth. So, you fast forward then to this year with the onset of COVID-19, the leading, special interests wasted no time in trying to capitalize on the pandemic in order to push their agenda. It was, I think, in March, maybe it was, that UTLA, which is the largest affiliate of, which, by the way, I was a member of. I used to be a high school teacher in Los Angeles before the Janus decision, so I wasn't able to opt out. So former UTLA member, they put out a statement saying, well, because of COVID, we can't approve any more charter schools, and we also need to evict charters from facilities that they share with traditional district schools, which is kind of a non sequitur. Well, how is it that charter school students are somehow like a unique risk when it comes to COVID-19? Of course, since then, these groups have realized the stakes for the school shutdowns are even higher, and this has kind of become the Super Bowl for them, and they've done everything they can to get the governor to keep schools shut down, which he's mostly been compliant with up to this point. But the charter school issues have continued to be mixed in with all of that. And, in fact, it's charters that have kind of provided the best way forward in a lot of cases, given the unique challenges we face. I know John Adams has continued to offer effective in-person instruction, which is exactly what their parents are asking for and exactly what the science says that we should be doing. Whereas, other districts with aided and abetted by the governor are completely under the control of their unions. I mean, we've even had some of these unions come out and say that we should not open any school, even if we can do so safely, because it's not fair for any one school to get a head start. But you also mentioned the bill that is dealing with the per pupil funding, and this was a surprise trailer bill that came up last year, just totally out of the blue with no process at all, that eroded the single driver of school quality in California, the idea that, funding follows the student. And, this is a big blow to growing communities. It was a big blow to districts that have attracted students because they are doing a good job. Basically, it said that if you attract new students, you won't receive funding for them this year, which was, basically stopped you from taking on new students. And that had the biggest impact on John Adams. And I'm probably taking, Carlos, I'm sure, or Norm is going to talk about this at great length. So I won't, go into it in too much depth, but it was simply unbelievable, given that a lot of charters as well were homeschool or at-home charters, non-classroom based charters had pioneered these methods of distance learning that were attracting families to them. And here was the state saying, well, sorry, you're not going to get any funding for that. And we're going to send, kids back to the schools they were trying to escape from. So, I think that the title of this panel is like challenges on the horizon. I think that these challenges are going to continue to, be there as long as we have the current leadership that we have in California. But, I do think it's going to be very important that folks who care about educational opportunity, who care about equity, continue to fight back and make it as difficult as possible for this agenda to go forward. And, hopefully we can, before too long, have the sort of fundamental political change we need to actually go back to the what you were saying, Lance. We were one of the first states to have a charter school law, and I'd like to see California actually start to lead again.
Well, thank you very much, Kevin, for those great and insightful words. Also, I think, you're absolutely right that, it's going to take a lot of grassroots action on the parts of Californians to make their voices heard to, the leadership that you referred to. And that, when you have 675,000 charter school students out there, that's a lot of families. And those are people who are very passionate about the education that their children are receiving from charter schools, and therefore I know that what's going on in Sacramento, unfortunately, is having a great impact on them. And I think that those parents and their children will rise up and make their voices heard in the future. And I think that's incredibly important. As I say, thank you very much, Assemblyman Kiley, for your remarks and your insight. Let me turn now to my good friend Norman Gonzalez for his remarks, and especially, talking about John Adams Academy and, some of the things that are percolating there that, may affect the future of charter schools here in California.
Well, Lance, thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me to be here. Thank you to the entire PRI team that's hosting this conference. It's truly an honor to be with you and with this esteemed panel to talk about not only our school, John Adams Academies, but also to talk about education in California in general. So John Adams Academy is a network of TK through 12th grade tuition-free public charter schools with campuses in El Dorado Hills, Roseville, and Lincoln. We're an American classical leadership education model in which we are preparing future leaders and statesmen through principle-based education centered in classics and great mentors. And John Adams Academy scholars are really taught how to think, not what to think. And they gain the skills and confidence necessary to thrive in any endeavor that they choose. And we're excited to be celebrating our 10th anniversary this year, 10 years of providing families with a high quality educational choice for their children. And as I looked to answer this question that was posed for this PRI conference, how can we advance a free market agenda during the Biden administration? It's really important for us to remember why charter schools were created in the first place in California. You gave us a great history as far as the year and kind of how it came about. But State Senator Gary Hart introduced the Charter Schools Act in 1992 as a compromise between education reform groups seeking to institute vouchers and the powers of big education, big ed, aka the teachers unions. And so Senator Hart was looking at how do I kind of prevent this voucher movement from winning and affect reform within California schools while at the same time keeping it within the public school system. And Senator Hart and others saw that the polling data showed that the growing appeal and likely success of the voucher movement would have broken the public school monopoly, right? And so in this charter school compromise, Hart was able to inject many free market principles such as school choice, local autonomy, at-will employment, but was able to keep this school choice option within the public school system. Now, charter schools are authorized and renewed by school districts, which also provide oversight and can revoke the charter for just about any reason that you can think of. Districts, mind you, which continue to be controlled or heavily influenced by big education, big ed, aka the teachers unions. And as free market principles were injected into the failing California school system back in 1992, what happened? Well, of course, these principles were extremely successful, and as parents gained the options for charter schools, they began leaving failing district schools in pursuit of a model that was a better fit for their children. With that success, however, charters have been under constant attack in order to restrict or eliminate the competition and return education to its full monopoly status. Everyone is aware of the landmark changes to the Charter Schools Act that you just talked about in 2019 and 2020 that seek to all but eliminate the creation of new charter schools. But charter schools have remained part of the public school system. They've never been able to truly live out free market principles, and they've never been able to truly achieve the goal of the California Charter Schools Act to provide vigorous competition within the public school system to stimulate continual improvements in all public schools. And this is clearly evident when looking at the funding. Right? So charter schools are publicly funded, meaning they're tuition free. And this is an enormous advantage to parents who do not have the ability to afford private school tuition. It's also an advantage to the charter school over the private school community where the option for tuition is a factor. It's a challenge to the charter school, however, because it's an additional restriction on the freedom of the charter school, and it prevents the charter from fully serving those seeking their services. It also violates free market principles by creating a barrier between the contracting parties. So the parent and the student are not really the consumer because they're not paying the cost. And the parent or student are not determining the level of service or quality of the product that they're receiving because of the significant regulations on charters. And yes, it's true that the parent or student has the freedom to withdraw from the charter if they're not happy. And those public dollars are supposed to follow the child. But if they cannot afford private school tuition, their only option is to enroll in another regulated charter school or a district public school or possibly homeschool. The public school funding model in which the dollars follow the child to whichever public school they choose is one of the few remaining pseudo vestiges of the free market in education. But when you scratch a little deeper, however, you see that even there, the free market principle only applies to the charter public school receipt of funds, and it doesn't apply to the district public schools. Well, what I mean? Well, many people don't realize that the district public schools are protected from losses by continuing to receive full prior year funding when they're experiencing declining enrollment. The charter public school, however, only receives funding for the children they're actually enrolled in their program and they're actually serving. But even this basic and relied upon principle that the dollars follow the child has proven to not be safe from attack. When faced with budget shortfalls following a government-imposed economic shutdown on COVID, how do you continue to fund district public schools at prior year levels when there isn't enough money to do so? Well, the answer is you fund all public schools, including charters, based on prior year levels. If you don't pay the schools that are growing for the children they're actually educating, then you have money to pay schools with declining enrollment for phantom students that don't actually exist. When Governor Newsom and the legislature adopted a state budget in 2020 in which they froze K-12 education spending at prior year levels and refused to fund any growth to enrollment, they severed that link between the funding and the child, which resulted in defunding the education of thousands of children in the state, as well as failed to provide schools the necessary resources to educate every child. It also demonstrated that by severing this link between funding and child, union interests could be protected and the market force of choice could be made irrelevant. So charter schools could continue to enroll students, but would not receive any funding for those newly enrolled students. This forced charters into a box of either denying children an opportunity to receive a public education of their choice, or accept new students and degrade the quality of the program for all by not receiving any additional monies for those additional children. Ultimately, the education of every new student is subsidized by the existing students. And John Adams Academy, unfortunately, is a glaring example of how this tragic action came to be for these children in our program and to our ability to serve them. So I mentioned that John Adams Academy is celebrating our 10th anniversary this year. We opened our first campus in Roseville in 2011 with approximately 500 scholars. Today, our Roseville campus has grown to over 1,400 scholars with another 1,200 on the wait list. As our wait list grew and we continued to receive requests from parents to expand, we opened 2 additional campuses in 2017, one in El Dorado Hills and one in Lincoln. In 2019-20, in that school year, our Lincoln campus was still operating in portables at a temporary location while we constructed a brand new permanent facility. And our capacity at the temporary location was limited to about 244 scholars. And that's what we ended up with enrollment as of that magic February 29th date. When the construction of a brand new, beautiful facility coming online for fall of 2020, our Lincoln campus swelled, right? With parents wanting to get in anticipation of this new campus. As of June 19th, our Lincoln campus had 838 students enrolled in TK through 10 for the upcoming 2020 school year. That was up from 244 students the prior year. As of 1 month later, in July 17th, enrollment had risen to 867, with an additional 95 students going through the enrollment process and 186 applicants on the wait list. It was at that time that we ended up having to file a lawsuit. So we continue to receive applications up to this day. And as of today, our Lincoln campus has 939 scholars enrolled with 264 on the wait list. The state, however, determined that they would no longer fund every child and instead froze funding at prior year levels. For Johns Academy Lincoln, what this meant was serving upwards of 900 children on the funding from only 244. Based on that tremendous harm and the potential closure of the school, we had no choice but to file litigation against the state. We were joined at the time by 3 other charter schools and a number of student plaintiffs. And although our case is yet to be heard, our litigation has had an impact. Following our complaint, the state passed a budget trailer bill funding planned growth, but only the growth that was included in a board adopted budget. Now, as you know, it's best practice to budget off of conservative enrollment projections so that you don't overextend hiring or purchases and end up not realizing the intended revenue. The last thing you want to do is hire a teacher and have to let them go because your enrollment didn't match your projections. Johns Academy builds its budgets off of these best practices, and as a result, include planned growth that was very conservative in our adopted budget, but not enough to cover the actual enrollment taking place. So even with this trailer bill where the state says that they will cover planned growth, we still have over 100 scholars at Johns Academy Lincoln that the state is still refusing to fund. So we're talking still $1 million loss to that one program. I was very proud of our leadership at the Academy that publicly voiced dedication early on from the very beginning of that budget process, a dedication to serve the families seeking our model and to the newly hired staff. We hired 31 new teachers at this school in order to address and serve this new growth. They were very concerned about what would happen to them as well. I was very impressed with our board and our leadership that they were dedicated to maintaining those staff and maintaining the service to all these families that wanted this option, regardless of what happened with the state. We were going to find a way. So where are we now? Our litigation is still pending. We still haven't had it heard, and we're awaiting a hearing likely to happen in about April or May. But what I find most interesting about our litigation is that while state attorneys are actively filing briefs opposing our effort to fund every child, still making the case, every case imaginable, throwing the kitchen sink at us, every case imaginable under the law to avoid making these children and our school whole, while they're actively arguing against us, the governor has come out with this 2021 budget with joyful news that the state has billions of dollars of unexpected revenue that they didn't anticipate, and a plan for spending these billions of dollars on a variety of pet projects, but never once indicating a desire to eliminate the harm suffered by these children this year. And this brings us back full circle to the question regarding how can we advance a free market agenda during the Biden administration? Well, in order to have any free market principles in K-12 education, and I think truly in order for there to be any future success in life for charter schools, we must alter the funding process and put dollars in the hands of parents in the form of education spending accounts. We've already seen that when given a choice, when given the freedom to choose, parents have chosen charter schools. What we need to do now is create an even playing field and provide the financial resources to every parent directly to find the school of their choice. By providing the resources directly to every parent, you restore the relationship between the consumer and the service provider. You open up the entire education marketplace to children by making all options financially viable. And you force charter public schools and district public schools to compete. You are not likely to achieve this change in the legislature, but you could achieve this via ballot measure, especially when educational choice is an issue that cuts across all demographics and all party affiliations. When it comes to what is best for the children, every parent wants a choice. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Norman. Now, those were, very important and insightful remarks. I couldn't agree with you more. I think that if the funding followed the child to whichever school that child wanted to go to, whether through an education savings account, like you say, or some other form, that you'll really have that competition, because right now, unfortunately, when charter schools like John Adams or like the Classical Academies or others do very well and attract a lot of interest from the community, the reaction, unfortunately, of many of the established interest groups is to try and eliminate them, not to emulate them, not to try and compete, fairly with them. And so I think that when you do give the parents, the consumers, greater power over that decision-making process, then things will change. So I appreciate those remarks very much. I'd like to now turn to my good friend Cameron Curry with the Classical Academies. And I think that one of the things that is very ironic in a very sad way is that here we are in the middle of this COVID pandemic crisis, and you would think that the one type of school that would receive, the full funding would be non-classroom based charter schools, because they are the ones who are most expert at providing remote distance learning, for example, in this type of environment. And yet the very schools that have that expertise are the ones that are being defunded. And that is just incredible. I mean, it's an Orwellian type of world that we live in. So I'd love to have Cameron speak to all of that.
Well, thank you so much, Lance. I was thrilled when I was going to be a part of this panel, and then hearing who was going to be on the panel is really great. And then to hear Kevin open his remarks with that he gets together with breakfast with you. So Norman and I were actually texting back and forth, and we're excited that we're going to be a part of the next breakfast opportunity. So it's very fun, very, very fun. So yes, it has been a challenge, let me tell you. So the Classical Academies, we've been open since 1999 here in North San Diego County. We have 7 locations. We serve 5,600 students, 56, 57 right in there, TK through 12th grade. And we're a part of the fabric of the community. The districts we serve know that we're a high quality option. We're helping them meet the needs of their school districts for the students that need something different. And we've got a great reputation and a great brand in San Diego County. And let's just also remember that we're non-classroom based, and sometimes people go, what the heck does that mean? And, are you independent study? Are you homeschool? I mean, are you hybrid? What does that mean? And so I think just from the legislative point, they're thinking, these kids aren't even coming to a campus to begin with. They're at home. Maybe they're online. I mean, what does that even mean? And so we are non-classroom based, but we do have facilities. We've got brick and mortar facilities where students have all different kinds of options. So they can be on a campus for one class. They can be on a campus up to a couple days a week. They're meeting with credentialed teachers. There's things that are happening in all different kinds of ways, because what we want to do is take the students, personalize the education. What do they need? Where are they at academically? And then let's create a program around that. And obviously family to family, that varies in what each student needs, but that's the DNA of what we do. And so as we think back to Friday, February 14th, I believe it was, when the first stay at order came, and pretty much every school district I knew about absolutely froze, didn't know what to do. And within just a couple days, because it's in our DNA, like you said, Lance, how to do distance learning is just in our DNA. And within a couple days, we were connecting with students, we were connecting with families, we're providing new content, grading, and connection with a credentialed teacher on a daily basis. And then, you start cruising into just getting through the spring and making sure everybody's taken care of. And then, of course, we watched with everybody else in the state, what are they going to do with the budget? How's the budget going to work? And as we'll all be reminded, on June 29th, when the governor signed the Budget Act, he said, I urge members of the legislature to pursue targeted solutions to these potential disruptions in funding, and I will work with you in the coming weeks to enact them. That's what he said. And we trusted him as a school leader. We trusted him as public education. We trusted him across the state, saying that Budget Act is not fully funding schools. He's made a promise. And as you know, working in the governor's office, Lance, how rare it is that you'll actually get that type of note on a Budget Act making those kinds of promises. And so we continued, at least at the Classical Academies, with that promise in mind, During the month of June, we picked up 1,200 new students. 1,200, that is $10 million in funding. And then when we closed enrollment on June 30th, there was still 1,000 people on our waiting list trying to get into our program, because they know here in San Diego County, we know how to do distance learning. We know how to deliver new content. We know how to make the connection to teachers. Where you had San Diego Unified, who waited 7 weeks, 7 long weeks before they ever engaged with families. And we were getting phone calls from families. We were getting calls from superintendents. We were getting calls from board members. You know, Cameron, how do you do what you do? How is this possible? How can we make this work? And then, of course, as we got into August, then we got the bad news as of the 31st that they had actually passed, you know, SB 820, and then the governor signed it, which basically sealed the deal. Cameron, you just took on $10 million of new students, and we're not going to give you a dime for them. It was outrageous, just incredible. And so that's when we stepped forward in September and we filed a class action lawsuit. We named the state of California, the governor, the state superintendent of public instruction, the state controller, and the Department of Education. These are constitutionally guaranteed dollars that should go to every student. And for the very first time in California's history, the money didn't follow the student. How ridiculous is that? And then on top of that, just to think as a taxpayer, you know, your children have left the traditional school district. They've gone to a high-performing charter public school, but yet the money will not follow your son or daughter. The money will go to the school district that your son or daughter never attends now. And those school districts are taking money for students they don't even serve. And they've closed their schools. They're not providing distance learning for weeks at a time. So if anything, they're just pocketing the cash. It's just outrageous. It's just outrageous. So we really, the basis of the lawsuit that we have right now is we believe that it violates statutory law. We believe that it violates common law contracts, because a charter has a contract with a local school district, which is publicly funded, which those dollars should follow those children that are here. So I decided to get creative. I decided, you know what? There's $10 million sitting in local school districts that belong to students attending the Classical Academies. So I decided, why not? I'll write a letter to each of those superintendents. I had our data manager actually pull those students, all the brand new students who just joined us, which school districts did they come from? And I'll provide a list of the students, an invoice for those dollars, and I sent them to the 30 different school districts here in San Diego County. Now you can imagine the joy that I had in doing that, and also just the fact that I wondered what would happen when that superintendent opened that letter that said, you have money for students you don't serve. They've come over to me. Would you please meet with your board and just do the right thing? Because we're public education. We're here for what's best for kids. We are not about adults and egos and attitudes and agendas. Aren't we all on the same page in San Diego County? We're here for what's best for kids. Well, you can only imagine the fun letters I got back from superintendents, back from their CFOs. And obviously the other thing that I heard through the grapevine was at a quarterly call of superintendents in San Diego County, there was banter. Did you get a call from Cameron? Did you get a letter from Cameron? Do we have to pay these letters? So I just did that as a point of reference, just to say, I want to bring local superintendents to the table and remind them what's happening, and also remind them that these are public resources that are hopefully for the benefit of students. And unfortunately, not one district, not that I'm surprised, not one district stepped up to say, you know, let's give you your money for the kids you're currently serving. So right now with the lawsuit, in December, the state and all of the parties responded with basically boilerplate language, not really challenging the merits of our case at all, which was interesting in itself, because they're not denying what they've done is definitely a breach of contract and a breach of public trust, a breach of, you know, these are constitutionally guaranteed dollars for students attending public schools. So right now we're filing a motion for summary here in February, and we are before a judge right now. We're being told the first part of April. And we definitely expect that that summary judgment will be handed to the Classical Academies as the lead petitioner in this lawsuit. Also with us is Springs Charter Schools, which is in the Riverside area. And then there's a smaller charter school in San Diego, the Learning Choice Academy. And we are all independent study. We are all non-classroom based. And I knew that when I talked to my board and said, when is the right time to step up against a bully? And if it's not us, then who? And we have to do this for the 300 plus charter schools that are independent study. That's 25% of all the charter schools in the state are being served in these programs that are really helping kids that are medically fragile, helping kids who cannot do a 5-day in-seat program, those kids who have special needs, and we're able to provide a special program specifically just for them. We serve those kids that are, you know, economically disadvantaged, or that nominal kid who just fell through the cracks. We're serving those kids who are academically struggling, you know, just across San Diego County. We serve kids from 32 different communities. And I just knew if we didn't do this for these kids at this time, who else was going to do it? And so, if anything, we've made the point, we've brought the spotlight back to the fact that, you know what, even when the governor came out with his $2 billion Let's Open Schools, reopening schools plan, we have never stopped serving students on our campuses since February. We've never stopped. And then to see that we're actually earmarked in that legislation, or his idea, that independent study, non-classroom based cannot participate in this funding. So why is it that the governor, the legislature, the superintendent of public education has said this group of students deserve a great public education in California, and these students don't? It's not fair, Lance. So thank you for allowing me the opportunity to share that with you and our panel and those listening in today. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Cameron. No, I mean, absolutely right. I mean, it's certainly not fair. I mean, you look at even, I mean, you know, in your lawsuit and the lawsuit that Norman Gonzalez and John Adams Academy have brought forth. I mean, there are so many parts of California law and constitutional provisions that these practices violate. I mean, you know, I mean, for me, first and foremost, that there should be equal protection of the law, you know, that the law should apply equally to everyone, and that includes students. I mean, yes, charter schools, but the charter schools are there for the students. And when you deprive students of the funding to which they are entitled to within California law, then you're not providing them equal protection. Right. And so therefore, you know, you are discriminating against a certain group of students. I mean, there's a lot of heightened, you know, attention amongst people to issues involving discrimination. Well, here's something that is like bald-faced discrimination right in front of us, going on against students, many of whom are coming from poor minority backgrounds. And yet, you know, this discrimination is going on in plain sight, unfortunately. I'd also mention too that, you know, and we have a couple minutes before we start questions from our audience, but let me ask Cameron very quickly that research has shown that charter schools have pivoted to this COVID environment, pivoted to a distance learning, remote learning model much faster and much you know, easier than the regular public schools. And now you mentioned, you know, the delay amongst the regular public schools in your area transitioning to a distance learning model. A lot of parents, and I'm sure a lot of parents who may be watching this webinar, you know, may not realize that there's distance learning and there's distance learning. There's distance learning being that it's called distance learning that the regular public schools are doing, but which they are doing very poorly because they're not equipped to do it well. And then there's distance quality learning, which places like the Classical Academies, like John Adams Academy, you know, the charter school movement, they're doing it very well. Could I ask you really quickly to tell us why Classical Academies does distance learning well and versus the regular public schools, which are not doing as well?
Well, I think it boils down to just a couple factors. First of all, we provide new content What we saw from February through June, just locally, was school districts were telling families, we're going to recover what kids already know. We're not going to offer any new content at all. And when it comes to grading, Mrs. Jones or Mr. Stevens, what we're going to do is we're going to freeze the grade of the student when they were in school in February, and they're pretty much guaranteed that grade, whether they do anything or not, all the way through the spring. And then we're going to also, some school districts said, we're only going to give you a pass or fail. Well, for us, it was like, that doesn't make any sense. We're going to offer new content. We're going to offer new grading. And we're going to offer you daily connection with a credentialed teacher. That's quality. That's high quality distance learning, is the new content, the grading, and the daily connection to a credentialed teacher. And then, of course, we offered small group instruction for those that needed it, for those who really desired it. And because I also had to remember the social and emotional needs of our students. And how do we continue to do that in a setting where the governor's telling us to stay home? Well, we just can't do that. Well, then, you still to this day have teachers unions saying, unless everybody's vaccinated, including mom in the car who brought the child and every child coming to school and every janitor and every teacher, we can't come back to school at all. I mean, who are we here for? Are we here for students or adults?
No, absolutely right. We're going to go to Tim in just a second with questions from our attendees, but I just want to give Norman very quickly any comments on what Cameron just said.
Yeah, I just want to echo it. Yeah, he's spot on. And we did the same thing when we had the stay-at-home order and we had to convert to distance learning. As a charter school with a local board who's looking to serve children, we took our in-classroom-based model and very quickly turned it around. And I think within a week had provided distance learning options with daily engagement, new content, and grading to our families so that they could continue their actual education. And then over summer, coming into this new school year, we actually our staff went through and completely revamped that distance learning model that we created during the onset of the pandemic, and really said, okay, how do we deliver a John Adams Academy education via distance learning? And so it's really that question of how do you give a legitimate program to these kids? And if you're just saying you're doing something at home, that's not distance learning.
No,
that's right. That's right. And a lot of what Cameron and Norman have talked about is also included in my my new report on the obstacles facing charter schools and how charter schools, however, have done a great job in this COVID environment. With that, I want to go to Tim Anaya, who may have questions for our panel from our listening and watching and viewing audience.
Well, Lance, you've set up the questions I'm getting from the audience quite well. So there are a lot of questions about Governor Newsom's school reopening plan and, the thoughts of the various panelists on that plan, and also how they view it might affect charter schools specifically.
Okay, well, let me go first to maybe Kevin Kiley, if he's on there. Kevin, if you're there, obviously in the Capitol, with a very front row seat about what the governor's proposing, and you've given your background in education and hearing what we've heard today. What are your thoughts about the governor's reopening plans and its deficiencies?
Well, I think it's they're not reopening plans. That's it's full scale, full on propaganda. He's had many such plans, and they've in many cases done just the opposite. For example, many of the districts in the area I represent are being forced to close or at least pare down their in-person instruction because of this 51-page set of requirements that was just released by his public health department, with things like you need to have desks 4 feet apart. So it's all a scam. It's been meant to make it look like he's trying to reopen schools, while all the while going along with exactly what the CTA wants. And even the modest efforts on the part of some in the legislature to move things along, have run into roadblocks. We were supposed to hear this bill AB 10 last week in Education Committee, which would have allowed for some measure of reopening. It was pulled at the last moment.
Well, I agree with you, Kevin. The EdSource, the education publication, respected publication up here in Sacramento, asked me for my thoughts on the governor's reopening plans contained in his budget. And one of the things I said was that even though he says that he wants to reopen schools, I mean, it's almost like the closing the barn door after the horse is left. Why is it now that we're wanting to reopen schools? Why wasn't it at the beginning of the fall? Why wasn't it earlier? Why all of a sudden now, is the emphasis on reopening schools? And so, now we've got so many kids who are, way behind in their schooling because they haven't had the opportunity to attend places like the Classical Academies and John Adams Academy. So I think it's a very difficult situation for so many children who don't have that option. Very quickly, Cameron and Norman, do you have any thoughts about that particular question?
Yeah, I was just going to say it's anything but a reopening plan. It's really a closing plan. Because there are a number of schools out there, both district public and charter public, that were open. We were open as soon as we could open after the color-coded chart went away. We were able to open early on in the year, and we provided 5 days a week in-person learning for our families. And this new reopen plan for schools that are closed forces all of those regulations on existing schools that are already open. And changes the rules of the game. And we see a lot of schools here in Placer County that are looking at potentially closing because of these new requirements. They're unrealistic. They're not based in science. There's no data to support them. We're hearing from parents every day now. I mean, most of my phone calls in the last week have been from parents just livid over these new face covering requirements for TK, kindergarten, first, second graders that didn't exist before, but now you've got 5-year-olds that are forced to wear a mask all day, every day, all day in the classroom, all day on the playground. There's no opportunity to take them off, remove them. And even with the mask on, you have to have these kids at least no less than 4 feet apart in their desks. And it's something that's untenable and unreachable when you have an enrollment of 25 to 30 kids in a classroom. It's just not possible. And so this was not designed in order to allow schools to open safely. This was designed to be able to give the unions cover not to have to open because these new regulations are untenable.
Yeah, no, the cruel irony of having a reopening plan that actually results in closing of schools. Cameron, real quickly, any...
And I would just say, if the governor and the legislature actually have $2 billion to give away, will you just give me the $10 million you currently owe me?
That's exactly what we've been asking. If you've got all this money, let's just make these schools whole.
Exactly.
That's right. Tim, next question.
Yeah, we also got a question about the Biden administration and the signals that they've been sending on charter schools and their initial weeks in office. Thoughts of his nominee for Secretary of Education and the direction that he signaled he might go in on charter schools.
Well, I just wrote a piece actually for the Times of San Diego, your neck of the woods, Cameron, on the direction of the Biden administration on charter schools. What we know is that during the campaign, President Biden has said that he wanted to eliminate certain categories of charter schools. For those remaining, he wanted to increase regulations and give school boards more power to deny charter schools the ability to function the way they have been functioning, that allows them to innovate, to do good stuff. And so, I see a very difficult time approaching for charter schools, not just on the state level, which is what we've been talking about here, but also too on the federal level with rules and regulations coming out of Washington, plus restrictions and strings tied to federal dollars. And so I think that's one of the things that Washington can really have an impact, because Washington can't tell school boards necessarily what to do by some edict, although with all the executive orders, who knows? But one of the things they can do is tie a lot of strings to those federal dollars, and I am afraid that that's what's going to be coming down the pike. As a legislator, let me ask Kevin, Kiley, what your thoughts are when you see issues involving federal funding of charter schools. Oh, and Kevin, you'll have to unmute yourself. Oh. Kevin, you'll have to unmute.
There we go.
You'd think that I'm a year into this, I'd figured the mute thing out. But one of the things that I think is really important for California right now is to share our own experience. And I'm not someone who opines on national politics, but I do think that, as some are suggesting, California is like some sort of model. I mean, Gavin Newsom even called us the roadmap to success for the Biden administration. It's incumbent on us who know that the answer is that the reality is just the contrary, to make our voices heard. So when Biden was looking at the former head of the NEA and the AFT to be his nominee for Secretary of Education, I wrote a letter which was signed by almost everyone in the Assembly GOP caucus, discouraging that. Because Linda Darling Hammond, by the way, Newsom's education board chair, was leading the Biden transition when it comes to education. And so we felt that if her voice was going to be pushing for these, union leaders, then we should let our voices be heard to show that actually, no, this would lead to the sort of outcomes that we've had in California. And as a result, I think that Politico actually picked up our letter, and this was before the Senate had changed hands. So it looked like this would sort of trigger a confirmation battle if he selected one of those folks. And so he ended up going with, I think, a more palatable pick. So, if the federal administration continues to make moves in the direction of, going after charters or restricting parental choice, I think that our state, as sort of the, exhibit A of the failure of such policies, we really need to have an important role to play.
No, I agree with that, Kevin. I think that if you look, for example, at just what's happened recently in the rankings of charter school laws, you find that several different organizations that rank charter school laws across the country have downgraded California over the last year because of these laws that you and Norman and Cameron have been talking about today. And so California really is a cautionary tale, I think, for the rest of the country. We used to be a real leader. We can still be a leader again. It's very possible, because that's certainly, I think, what the population, especially the parents here in California, would like. We still have that opportunity, but unfortunately, too much of our political class here has stopped listening to the voices of parents and are listening to the special interest groups that have grown up around regular public education. So with that, I think that we're coming close to the end of our time, Tim,
Yes.
and I want to turn it back over to you. And I want to thank each one of our panelists, Assemblyman Kevin Kiley, Norman Gonzalez of John Adams Academy, and Cameron Curry of the Classical Academies. We were fantastic panelists, incredibly insightful remarks, and I think it really does give us the full picture and a possible roadmap down the road for charter schools here in California. And with that, thank you to all our viewing audience. Back to you, Tim.
Well, thank you to Lance, and thank you to all of our great panelists for this panel and all of our panelists today.